and welcome to another edition of Your Therapist Needs Therapy, the podcast where two mental health professionals talk about their mental health journeys and how they navigate mental wellness while working in the mental health field, or the podcast where I, Jeremy Schumacher, friendly neighborhood licensed marriage family therapist. There we go. It's the start of the week. It's going to be a long one, where I riff on mental health topics that are relevant to the current world. Super fun sometimes. Actually, no, this episode hopefully gets a little optimistic. I refer to myself as a cynical optimist, which is I am aware that good things can happen and even hopeful that they will. I'm just skeptical that that'll happen until I see some evidence of it. And so, yeah, sometimes I can be a little dreary on this podcast, which is to say, the theme of the podcast is that everybody needs help with their mental health. So I don't think it's dreary. I personally don't think it's dreary so much as realistic. And also, I don't want to be dreary all the time. So a few episodes ago, I had Mario Ismael Espinoza on, and they referenced a book, Hospicing Modernity. And I'm in the process of reading the book. And so I'm not quite ready to talk about the book yet. And if you want to go listen to my episode with Mario, that is a few episodes ago. But today, with that sort of in mind, I'm a member of the Climate Psychology Alliance of North America. Hattie Parmiter and Kelsey Philippi have been on in relation to those topics, CPA, NA specifically. Kelsey's been on a couple times. And so I'm just around this idea of the collapse. I'm around this idea of things breaking apart. It's something that I think I'm around it not by happenstance. I'm around it because in my work I see it happening all the time. And this isn't simply couples breaking up. This is more about the structures that I grew up in, that I came up through, that I got my license and credentialing through, falling apart, and what happened then. I generally am resistant to the idea of collapse, although I do think that is how we're talking about it as a culture, that the American empire is on its way out. And I like to use the word crumble. I don't remember where I heard it first. Somebody smarter than me said it's not really a collapse, it's a crumble. Because there are parts that are going to be maintained. There are things that are still going to hold up, and there are things that are going to break off over time. And we're already experiencing that. Spoiler alert, this is sort of where we land at the end of the episode today, if I do it well, which is we're already experiencing all of these things. But I do want to talk about what might happen. This is a wildly speculative episode. This is not something that I necessarily have a ton of research or a ton of even background on. I try not to prognosticate. I get a lot of things wrong. And also I want to sort of look at like where we're going, what might happen in the future. I do this a lot in therapy when we talk about treatment goals, when we talk about progress plans, and we talk about, sort of checking in and reevaluating and seeing where we're at. I do a lot of planning for the future. What do we want it to look like? What are we looking for? What are signs of progress? What are the markers that we're going to see when we know, so we know that we get there and it's not just moving goalposts all the time. So I do prognosticate a lot in therapy in the sense of most likely outcomes. And that is hopeful and also based in some sort of reality. So I think that's how I'm approaching it here. I have a hard time being like, no one knows. And I do agree with that. I agree in principle that no one really knows, and agree strongly that if somebody tells you for sure that they know, that you don't listen to that person, whether that is a teacher, an elder, especially if it is a church or a cult leader. Gosh, they've been claiming to know what was going to happen next, and they've been wrong 100% of the time. So yeah, I mean, let's do it. Come along with me. This is a thought experiment to see how optimistic I could be. I mean, I certainly think we are living through this one already, but I would say one potential outcome is like things just get even more authoritarian, right? This is the system collapses, crumbles, etc. Empire fails, and what takes its place is, I don't even want to say this is empire fails. This might be insurance companies fail, and we nationalize therapy. Woohoo! Single payer insurance. Everyone saves a ton of money. This is a good idea, except for the idea is that single payer only is going to pay for one type of therapy, probably CBT. That's what insurance companies like the most right now, and so we'll shift. Society will shift and make progress, which would be good, which would be single payer healthcare. Um, the problem would be what happens, and this is again realistic because like look at who's in charge of HHS right now, and a decade ago that would have seemed preposterous. So we're dealing with the crumble already, but having people who are not qualified or people who are definitely have special interests in mind or are just corrupt are in charge, and we get nationalized mental health care, but it is only of a certain type. Again, if we had nationalized healthcare now, they'd be working really hard to make sure trans people couldn't get healthcare coverage, right? So this is what Soviet psychiatry looks like. I would say is the historical precedent, which is where certain things were outlawed, certain things were demonized, dissent was demonized. And so, again, this is sort of a crumbling future where part of the institutions that we're dealing with now that are bad and harmful, not just to our mental health as a society, but how we as mental health professionals practice mental health, it would be great to get rid of insurance companies. Full on board, love it. And we do have to be intentional with what's going to take its place. If it is nationalized healthcare, what does that look like, and who gets to make those decisions? Is it patient and provider gets to make those decisions together collaboratively? Is it the state making those decisions? Because the state is going to enact violence on marginalized communities. And so I certainly think we have been microdosing this. We've been getting tiny versions of this. It's what health insurance, not health insurance, it's what workplace employee assistance programs, EAPs, are, which is X number of sessions covered for X number of issues only, no wiggle room. And again, these companies want a pat on the back to say, look, we're taking our employees' mental health seriously. No, you're not, right? Like wellness is an ongoing process. Mental health is not separate from physical health. I think, again, the idea of mental health would become accessible for everyone, quote unquote, but it still protects the system at large would be a bad outcome. That's what we have now. And not only is it protecting the system at large, but it also profits in unnecessary third party. Again, how insurance companies came in to be the only people making money off of mental health, because it sure isn't the providers. I'll never understand. But this would be an unfortunate outcome, and also I think a very realistic outcome, because again, we've been practicing this already. This would be, we get rid of insurance companies because they're bad and unnecessary, and we replace it with a state-sponsored model that doesn't correct anything other than costs are down, and maybe not even costs are down, but just accessibility goes up. And so all providers can get paid by the state if they do the state-approved therapy. And again, this would be a bad outcome, because a lot of things that I already work with are not even in the DSM yet. So having what crumbled to be the insurance companies would be a net benefit for people's overall health and wellness writ large. This would be a bad outcome long term for mental health, and especially for providers, because this would really hem us in and limit who we can work with and how we can work with them. So that would not really be a benefit to, again, it would just shift the class who's benefiting here. There would be a certain social class who does benefit from mental health being done this way, probably the people who are going to keep what bit of empire still remains intact. Um, and again, this can go really poorly. I think a better version would be, well, this gets into the second future I sort of see. Um, if we're going to stay sort of in that model, the authoritarian model, there's a hierarchy, top down model. I think it would be better if not even like states, because I'm not a states' right person. I don't think borders should exist. Um, but I think the governing various boards, right? When you have people who are professionals in the profession, that's going to be better. Is it still bad? Yeah, because those are the people who put together the DSM, right? It's a bunch of stuffy academics who no longer work with clients, who are out of touch with the population in general. You're going to have definite class biases involved in that process. But that would be better than the state, right? Or the federal state, the state as somebody who talks politics talks about it. That would be better, right? Like, for the federal government to say, the Supreme Court specifically to say, hey, it's okay to, it's protected speech for licensed professionals like therapists to do harm if it's religious speech, right? We're going to let religious people harm children because we think the religion is more important than the harm. That's what the Supreme Court just did with the conversion therapy case that was in front of them. And every single state licensing board, every single organization, so like the Wisconsin Association of Marriage and Family Therapists came out and had something. The Illinois um, Association of Marriage and Family Therapists had something, right? Lots of different people have come out and said conversion therapy is harm. It's unethical to practice this way. People who are licensed under us are not going to practice this way, and you can report them if they do. And so again, like you have sort of the state, the federal government weighed in one way, and then the singular states, licensing boards, the professionals in specific geographic areas came out and said something different. And that segues into the second thing. We have a wider collapse, not just of the insurance industry, not just of capitalism as our model of economics, but of the empire. The United States collapses and breaks into smaller pieces. And so we end up with no real central system at all, a much smaller fragmentation. This has happened in different places throughout the world, throughout history. A big country splits up into littler countries, and hard to say what the benefit would be, right? Like some places would benefit greatly from that. Some places would really fall apart. If that happened in America, like the East Coast would probably be okay. The West Coast would probably be okay. Middle America would be widely divergent in whether it was okay or not. Again, if you sort of look at where there's already service deserts, where there's already mental health deserts, those places would not be okay if we had a sort of fractured fragmenting. There wouldn't be enough providers, and those providers would be really narrow in scope, and there wouldn't be the resources to be able to fund something like that. Where if you look at, California could do this with their economy already, where they could just say, hey, we're going to do it this way, and we're not necessarily needing or asking for the federal government's permission or help to do this. We're just going to do it this way because it's what we want to do. And again, a benevolent leader, that mythology out there of a benevolent leader would be by following the science, right? And so, you would have places, East Coast, West Coast, that have big enough economies, that have the resources available and have enough providers available to be able to do something like this. Who knows? Again, it's that spider web idea where everything is connected, even if it's not a one-to-one connection, even if it's not direct connection. What would happen in that fragmentation to those local economies, to things like housing and finances and other stuff? I'm sort of taking and extrapolating what already exists and saying, now if the federal government wasn't there, but within that, I mean, again, you're going to lose some of those things. I'm not like again, I said the state's going to enact violence against marginalized communities earlier because that's what states do. I don't know that we get to like full anarchy. And even if we did get to full anarchy, we would have things popping up like cults and cultic leaders. and maybe they wouldn't be religious, but likely, again, that's what human history has sort of been is a superstitious response to things that we can't answer. Um, I would love to think there would be places that are community based, reciprocal, bottom up leadership, and funding for things like a peer to peer model and things like research and those things would still go on, non pathologizing, not focused on impairment. Lovely. Again, cults and grifters would pop up though. I mean, like MLMs are the latest in a long line. Mass level marketing. Mass level marketing? What's the first M? Um, Mary Kay and whatever sort of wellness grift goes on and in these things, the pyramid schemes, those types of things would also pop up, right? And Scientology has that built into their religion. So we've already got a marriage of religion and this multi-level marketing. There it is. Multi. The first M is multi. It again, it's a Monday. I'm recording this on. Um, and you'd have these gaps. You'd have these gaps where people are filling in and just doing their best, but without training, without other guardrails, like harm's still going to get done there. So the potential of fragmentation of things breaking apart, um, I think is realistic. And again, depending on where you fall on those fault lines, is probably going to dictate what it looks like. Again, sort of the thread that ties this to not just some like fanciful science fiction-y future, but also to an idea around like we're already dealing with some of this is yeah, your care already where you are geographically already dictates your care pretty deeply. Even places that have a better healthcare industry than we have, like um, Europe, places in Europe like Canada, healthcare, mental health care can still vary wildly depending on where you're at geographically. Even if the resources and funding are there, are the specialists there? Have those specialists had access to the training that they need? Is the education there? Um, and again, I think I hold space for like I'm reading this book about um, letting go of modernity, and I've been in a field of practice where the school of thought that I come from around therapy is the postmodern therapies. It's narrative therapy, solution focused therapy, and what I practice just collaborative language therapy, which are all like postmodern already. So again, letting go of modernity has never really been a question for me. Modernity is old, right? This died in the 1950s, and we still have a civilization that's built on it. Um, so our bad, or the leaders who came before us. Thanks, boomers. Um, but yeah, I'm not trying to carry in modernity with saying education and those sorts of things. Certainly moving to a less hierarchical authority system on like education gets to dictate, but more that like education is exists and is available to everyone would make education better. The fact that we've put education behind a paywall is part of the problem. Why we have sort of this idea of like the ivory tower academics is because like yeah, they don't have to interact with real people very often. And once you get tenured, you have no real impetus to like do something different. You just crank out your new edition of your textbook every 3 years so you keep getting enough money to keep funding whatever you're personally interested in your research, and you do that. But like, yeah, academia is one of the structures, one of the institutions that would need to crumble. Again, I think there's lots of models of education that are not based in modernity, that are not um, limiting in that sort of way. So I look at that as like a breaking open that could be really good. Again, that fragmentation in this hypothetical fragmented future, I think it's questionable about what would happen with education. Again, there are places where the resources are probably abundant enough to make that available for all. And again, the resources are abundant enough for everyone everywhere. We have enough houses to house everyone. We have enough food to feed everyone. These things are policy choices, not physical restrictions. Um, but in some sort of future where the collapse accelerates or becomes more pronounced, who knows? Again, we have certain states here in America that are welfare states. They are the red states. They are the states that are in the middle of the country, that do not produce enough on their own to survive without federal support, and that federal support is through taxing blue states. Like, this isn't a mystery. It just is something people don't like to talk about because our whole system is broken. And if you talk about one thing, you're like, well, we should fix that. Well, like, then we have to fix voting and get rid of the electoral college and a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, uh, I don't know. And certainly I get concerned about the fragmentation on the rise of, like, with social media being available, just sort of the rise of, like, pop psych wellness culture. Again, if the crumble turns into a collapse and we're left with fragmentation, and what people are getting is some version of whatever the future TikTok will be, and it's not vetted, not verified, not reliable information, like, you're going to have these wellness cults that don't need to be, like, organized around a particular religion, pop up. And again, you see this already when you study cultic behavior. It's not just religions. There's lots of wellness gurus that are running cults. There are cults that have been broken up that are wellness based and not that. Certainly see a lot of yoga gurus, a lot of wellness gurus who are operating using a coercive control model like a cult leader would. So again, I think a lot of that stuff would pop up. What would that look like in some sort of future where tech was potentially either really restricted based on where you were or freely available? Again, I don't know. I tend to think making the internet free and open source and accessible to everyone is a good thing. Again, enforcing a scarcity that is not based in a reality does not make sense to me. So yeah, I tend to think, like, right, having education be open and accessible to everyone, having um, technology be open and accessible to everyone. Like, I'm not dismissing that there would be problems with that. Again, I think the fragmentation would really exacerbate the differences, the problems in that, depending on where you were, because that fragmentation would dictate what the resources look like. So yeah, again, we're dealing with some of this already. Not to belabor the point, but I'm going to keep making the point that, like, there is no future that I think can fully get rid of what we're already dealing with. We love the metaphor of, like, the phoenix rising from the ashes and something new being there, but, like, that isn't what the history of humanity is, unfortunately. So, what our third sort of future, and where I think I'm not done reading it yet, but hospicing modernity sort of lands is this. They use a composting metaphor, which is that this thing that has lived its life, served its time, expired, needs to be composted. It needs to be broken down into parts and let those parts sort of. This isn't what the book says. Again, I haven't finished it, but, like, ferment and die and then grow into something new. Those resources be broken down so it can be somewhere else. This is what I think a lot of people who are trying to be realistic about the future sort of land at, is, like, we can't prognosticate the future, which again, I don't disagree with. The old system, in this hypothetical future, the old system needs to break down enough for something new to emerge. And again, when you have colonial capitalism baked into pretty much everything we do, that is like a full breakdown of the systems and institutions that exist now. And I'm just not sure. That's the future that makes me the most hopeful. That's also the one that I'm the most skeptical about. We just haven't seen it. We see it in sci-fi, we see it in fiction all the time. Um, I think there's a version of this that the version of this that exists, and I'm obviously biased here because this is where I've sort of landed professionally already, but is in a model that is moving away from diagnosis, is moving away from insurance codes, is trying to do things with science, with research, with academic rigor, but not to fit some sort of overall overarching narrative, but with health in mind. Healers healing people on a specific basis, but also healers paying attention to what the sickness says about the community, the society, writ large. And again, I think for a long time, psychology did a bad idea of that. For a long time, psychology worked really hard to pathologize individuals instead of systems. I think that has shifted in the recent future where psychology is saying, well, people are sick because the system is sick. It's really hard to be healthy in late stage capitalism. Um, an acknowledgement that like suffering is real, but it's not a diagnosis. Um, and where we get to like, that's not, we all hold hands and sing kumbaya around the maypole and ignore that people are unhappy or unwell. Again, there's still healing that has to happen in that. Um, but it's driven by the person, by the community. And again, even when I say community, it's so hard to get out of a hierarchical mindset of like, well, who decides? Um, but having a community that is more egalitarian, where everyone fits and gets to be appreciated because of their differences. Um, a society that has a space for misfits, a society that has space for those people who are divergent in some way, those people who are expansive in other ways, um, and a society that works to encapsulate that, right? Like that has space and acknowledges that. Um, I saw somebody talking the other day about universal basic income and just suggesting that like not only is it about getting your needs met, but the world would change with having our basic needs met, not because of our needs being met, but because we could do the things that we actually want to pursue. There's so many people who aren't pursuing their dreams, so many people who aren't doing the things that they're actually genuinely interested in, but the world's just a duller place because of that there's so much joy and love and beauty that is missing because people can't pursue what they're actually interested in. Um, and again, I think that makes me optimistic. I'm certainly interested in that future because again, I think there's people who would be interested in helping, and there are people who would be interested in healing others, and helping others heal, but they can't because of their own stuff or their own worries or imposter syndrome. They don't have the resources. They weren't allowed to go to school or get credentialed in certain ways. There's a lot of things that I think get in the way of that. But I'm also wary because I see the older generation doing this constantly, and it's making me a little bit batty as a millennial. Just saying like, oh, young people will solve it, right? Where there's this idea of like, instead of taking any accountability for anything, just sort of saying like, I'm optimistic about the future because I talk to young people. And like I've been there, right? Young people have been a lifeline to my optimism at various points, especially around climate change. Because they are more serious about it and they are also more optimistic about it than I tend to be. But because I'm cynical old man, not because I'm right and they're wrong. Um, but again, there needs to be like, you can't just be like, oh, young people will figure out how data centers won't destroy the environment, like, and then still use AI. You can't ignore like the pollution and the techno fascists that are being allowed to run amok and be like, young people will figure it out. So again, I don't want to be like so amorphous and formless about some potential futures. Say like, well, that's just for our kids and grandkids to figure out. Because I think that's irresponsible to the future generations. I think we do need to sit in this discomfort of like, ooh, this thing is amorphous. How can we shape it a little bit more? How can we support it as it transforms and whatever else it needs to do, how it incubates and whatever molting and growing and shaping needs to happen, like what would support for that look like? And again, it's very sort of I don't want to say it's so mysterious that we can't dictate it. I think a lot of the mental health space, that's not even true. I think I'm on an exceptional side of that. Not like, look at me, I'm doing such great work, but I don't think it's mainstream yet to criticize the system and call that out and move to a more community-based practice. Because again, we're not out of capitalism yet, and that is the overarching system. I think a lot of therapists who are decolonizing their work are doing so, where they're moving away from diagnosis, they're moving away from an impairment-based model, they're calling out ableism that they see and moving away from that, but also therapists still have to pay rent for their buildings, still have to make their own personal ends meet. And so we're not quite at a point where, you know, decolonizing is really important work and more therapists need to be doing it. And we're still living under an imperialistic colonized system, multiple systems. And so it's hard, right? Like it's hard to say, yes, we can be moving towards a community-based model, and a lot of people are still doing individual therapy. A lot of people are running groups and doing other things, and you have to charge for that stuff because you have to pay your own bills. So again, I mean, I'm not putting it on therapists to solve the problems of the world, obviously. There are other forces at work and other institutions that need to do that work to set up healers, nurses, doctors, surgeons, acupuncturists, therapists, again, like healers writ large to do that. Healers are, stemming the blood flow of these open wounds, these death by 1,000 cuts of these things. But the system, again, I don't know. That sounds bad to be like, we need to let it die. Again, because we're not serving the system, we're serving individuals who are suffering under the system. But again, I think this is the stuff that I'm drawn the most to because I think it feels the most realistic in the sense, in a hopeful sense, right? That the system can be laid to rest and something else can take its place. I talk about in different places with different indigenous folks that I work with and other therapists who have that indigenous heritage, talking about like duaitsi and being able to appreciate indigenous practices and knowledge, cultural knowledge, historical knowledge, oral traditions that are passed down that are living, contextual, meaning-making processes, and the scientific method, right? Like there's space for these things. And again, it's not who gets to be right and claim authority and be in charge and have the power, but like, how do we make space for these things to work in conjunction? How do we have feedback loops and recursive systems that allow for these things to work together? And again, I think a community sort of model makes that the most likely, but our communities are going to have to look a lot different. Which gets into a whole nother episode of a podcast. How do humans work in community? Historically, kind of poorly. Because we don't often have the bottom up building happening, right? It's been too much top down, just across the board, across history. But that's also why a couple times a week I have people who are complaining about their employment or their bosses or whomever, and I'm like, yeah, there just aren't a lot of good leaders in the world because we really haven't done enough to have a cohesive response to top-down leadership. The models exist; they're out there. I'm not saying people haven't done the work. Just I don't know what needs to happen there. But this is supposed to be a hopeful episode, right? This is the stuff that tends to keep me up. I don't want to say keeps me up at night. I'd be lying to you if I said that. This is the stuff that my brain chews on the most and gets frustrated by, and that's the least happy outlet with is how do individuals shape and change systems? And I know the answer is you can't. You have to collaborate. You have to organize. Groups of people either become their own systems or groups of people organize and change the systems that exist. So, when you see multiple warehouse fires going on and some cohesive messaging around you need to pay us a livable wage, it does seem that something is shifting, that there is a change, that people are organizing, people are mobilizing is perhaps more accurate than people are organizing, but there is organization available. And so again, I think that shift needs to be there. I think mental health can certainly be one helpful curb in getting people to head that direction, right? Which is to say, there's a future that is equally, if not more authoritarian. There's a future that is deeply fractured. and unhelpful. And then there's a future that is cohesive, that is expansive, and that would be lovely, right? So look at me, ending on optimism of cohesive expansiveness. I don't even know if those words go together. This is why I don't like to prognosticate. Yeah. So, again, I mean, I see a lot of work around this stuff. It exists. I think it is still in the minority, especially in the mental health field, of people who are moving in the space. But there are, I'll just use like our psych directories. Like Psychology Today is still the #1 psych directory, even though most therapists know. I don't want to say most therapists. The therapists that I all talk to that are in my networks know it's not a good company. That's not even true, because a lot of therapists I have in my network aren't aware of how bad of a company it is. And so then people move off and they go to something else that's more aligned, inclusive therapists, and a lot of directories that are popping up on specific issues, which I think is great and needed, and also like can't compete in the current market with what we have for like algorithm run SEO and stuff like that. Like, we're still running the rat race with stuff like that. So, but yes, there are other options out there that are more ethically aligned and more community-based, values-based, and it's still just in the minority. So again, it's a financial system around late-stage capitalism. It is a paradigm shift around, also financial, moving away from insurance companies' reimbursement rates. It's a paradigm shift around moving away from a deficit-based model. So there are all these different factors that sort of have to coalesce and meet. There needs to be a convergence. And again, whether that's a collapse or a crumble or whatever that looks like, some of that system stuff needs to shift. But like, mental health needs to be better prepared than it is to meet that shift and work with it, instead of upholding the old systems, instead of defending the empire that has existed. And we're not. We're not. We're still spending time teaching Freud and Gestalt therapies and all this other nonsense that is old and is historically relevant but not helpful to people today. Come at me, psychodynamic therapists and Gestalt practitioners. Like, be better. So again, and that's another institution then, right? That's education that has to shift. So there's a lot of moving parts that make it feel very complex, but there were a lot of moving parts to get here in the first place. It wasn't some inevitability that this is where we ended up. There were movements and shifts and changes in organization to nudge and, in some cases, coerce things to be the way they are now. And again, it's organization and mobilization to shift and nudge and coerce things to be the better version that they could be in, hopefully not too long of a future. Not too long away, not too far away. Not that the future ends quickly, but that we get to that future quickly. Optimism. We're doing it. We tried it for a week. Likely next week we won't be there still. We'll see. But yeah, we'll be back next week with another new episode. Working on some guests. I'm being casual with my scheduling. I sort of like some breaks here and there with guests, and I like having guests on because I don't like hearing myself talk the whole time. That's for sure. So yeah, you would think after however many episodes we'd have it figured out, but we remain fluid over here at Your Therapist Needs Therapy. We remain in therapy ourselves. Also optimism. Yeah, we'll be back next week with another new episode. Take care of yourself. Take care of somebody else.